Hello and good afternoon and welcome along to our Thursday lunchtime session. Tienie, hello, how are you?
I'm very good. It's nice and warm here where I am, so loving it.
Actually, just come from the best networking session ever. We did pickleball, so we were
Oh, yes.
behind time this morning. So yeah, I've never played pickleball before, but it was a really great session. So for those that have never come across us or that come back, we run a session every Thursday lunchtime around empowered leadership discussions and help you think about things differently from a different perspective and help you be a more collaborative leader, owner in your business. So we take little micro topics every week and just deep dive, just talk about them, share what we see and out in the business landscape and share our opinion from our expert perspective. So today we are talking about the future of work. Is it hybrid? Is it in the office? This is a topic that I think a lot of organizations are coming across. I think since obviously COVID, we've seen a very different dynamic in the workspace. So it'll be really interesting to get your thoughts, Tienie, to share what we see in the challenges with both and what we think that future looks like.
Yes, hybrid working is here to stay. So we need to kind of embrace that for ourselves. I understand that there are lots of properties that need to be filled with bodies and for the rent to be validated, those kind of things, which makes sense. And also make no mistake that team dynamics increases with closer proximity. So having people work together, getting quicker answers. Hey, John, I'm stuck with this. Where are we going with it? What's happening? Getting quick answers and moving. It creates fluidity and improves the outcome and performance of it. But I feel that instead of it being a force feed, it should be a activity towards reward. We would want to go into the office because I'm meeting my team and I get excited of working with them and create an environment that facilitates people wanting to be in the office. Should that be your policy?
Mm-hmm. So let's just talk about what we currently see in, because obviously everybody was forced to work from home in the time of the pandemic, where before that, it was very few and far between jobs. And we're talking kind of office jobs, like jobs where you have a base, very few and far between that actually were fully remote or work from home. It wasn't the norm, I don't think, at that point. Then it very quickly became the norm. Then the kind of years that followed, we were trying to find some kind of what works, what doesn't. And I feel like we kind of have gone from everyone being okay with working at home to everybody now coming back to everyone's forcing people back into the office. And there has been studies done and there has been research around the topics, but we are seeing we're seeing a kind of almost backward step where we're seeing real big players enforcing back to the office rules, aren't we? So I do feel like we've kind of gone through it's okay to work from home. Actually, we're going hybrid. Actually, let's go back to full-time office. Like that's, I feel like, what we've seen as a pattern.
I'm going to be a little bit controversial here for
I love
a
it.
bit. I feel sometimes there were policies mandated for full-time in the office so that people would leave the business. And they would then recalibrate with when the dust settles, who's committed and who's not committed to that. And in the process of that, they lost great talent, potentially. They lost people that they wanted to leave the business. So I think it was a cleansing activity, potentially, recently. So I'd hear some thoughts on that. The second piece is then there were people or businesses that had future-looking goggles on and indicated to their folk to get together in the office to create a plan of how we can get everybody back into the office. And so they orientated the narrative towards reward. And it's not coffee and free muffins on a Wednesday, and that's not the reward. The reward is the whole team dynamics and delivering a piece of work in a premises that works for you, and gets you out of the house. So there's different camps of that, and for you and me, it's kind of a privileged position to be able to talk about this in a sense that we can work from anywhere.
Yeah.
And being comfortable with that. And make no mistake, I think when the pandemic struck, there was at least 20% of people that were struggling, and their work was null and void, and it was a tough time, because even although they could work into a hybrid space, that didn't help their role or the work that they did. They needed to be in the manufacturing plant. They needed to be on the shop floor. So those are things that I feel we need to consider in the whole movement and play of full-time, remote, or hybrid.
And I think that's important, because we all assume everybody wants to work from home, everybody wants that flexibility, but actually for some people, they don't want it, they want that interaction. And for some people, their jobs don't allow that. And then that comes to that disparity of how are we equal, where I think sometimes we need to look at it from an equity perspective of like, these people can do it and it's able, and their jobs can do it and it can be hybrid, but over here, this role doesn't. And I know that might create some, controversy around unfairness, but I think it's about looking at it from a really kind of big picture perspective.
Yeah.
Before the pandemic, and you'd have been the same, I've had the privilege of pretty much most of my career working from home, working from location, traveling, having an office space, but because of the roles I've always done, I've always been able to pick and choose to some degree where I was and whether I was at home. So going fully remote to me it wasn't an issue. But there were people that really, really struggled from a well-being perspective, but also from a professional perspective. And I think from my perspective, I think a balanced view of the situation, the environment, the person, the team, all that stuff comes into play. But what we are seeing is people make decisions for different reasons, aren't we? And there's almost an excuse of people aren't productive, when we've seen research that hybrid models are engaging, they are productive. We do see people thriving in them. But it's an interesting one, isn't it? And watching it play out, it's really interesting on the dynamics of who's making those decisions. And we have really, like you say, forward-thinking organizations thinking very differently, doing different things, hiring very differently if they were previously. But then we've got the real big traditional businesses pretty much going back to what they were like 5 years ago.
Yeah. The whole thing, this whole discussion impacts culture. Now, there's two things that happen, two things this has triggered for me. The one is from a behavioral assessment perspective, and being a specialist in the People Skills Hub, there's at a minimum 33% of people that need office engagement, that want to work with my mates in the office, be part of the team. Then there's about 20% that neither here nor there. But so I would say from a measurement perspective, 50% of people want to actually work in the proximity of other people in an office environment. So that's the one kind of theoretical approach. The second one is where people have the discussion and they decide, okay, well, 50% of our people are in the office and the other 50% can work hybridly. So we're going to have to mandate that everybody comes in. And so because some of us are in, all of us need to be in, for instance. Then the other element is the organization that understands the workings of hybrid, where there are people that are required to process orders, be on the manufacturing plant, be in the business from a finance, legal, processing perspective, 5 days a week. And then you have the salesperson flying in on a Wednesday, distracting people, going to the manufacturing plant and then walking away. And everybody says, oh, well, we're in the office from Monday to Friday. These guys just lob in and lob out.
Yeah.
Whereas the discussion has been had is that, you know what, guys, from a sales perspective, so the commercial director speaks to all the salespeople, say, listen, come, when you go into the office, make it an intentional piece where you go in at 9 and you leave at 5. The coming in at lunchtime, bringing people muffins and then leaving still leaves a bad taste in the mouth from a you can just fly in and fly out, or come in for the morning to walk the floor and understand where your orders are and have customer calls where people see you actually doing your work, and then going out for the afternoon to a customer call close to the proximity of the business and making that known. So it's how do we facilitate the inconsiderate approach? And I'm not saying salespeople are inconsiderate. I'm just thinking people are just going back to the norm and just flowing in the thing. But we do need to be considerate in the way that we approach the whole hybrid culture that it creates.
Yeah, and like you say there, it's very much about the perception you're creating in that situation that you're seeing, and almost being aware of that, how the shadow you're casting when you're going in and out of hybrid office locations. And another part of this, like just to offer up for discussion, is I don't know if you've come across Mother Pucker. She does a flex appeal, and this is all around how actually flexible working allows mothers more opportunities and to progress in their career easier. And obviously, because if they're out on maternity leave, childcare, or that obviously we know falls as a majority to the mother, and she's done a huge appeal, like flex appeal, and it's incredible, and she's got it into Parliament, and she's really banging that drum. So there are people that actually benefit, not just that they enjoy the flexibility or they have a better work-life balance, like they truly progress in that with a flexible working environment. So there are people who are getting opportunities or access to roles potentially that they wouldn't get access to in a traditional sit at your desk 9 to 5 approach, isn't there?
Yes.
Is that Maggie? What does Maggie say?
Oh yes, can you? Yeah, is it Maggie? Yeah, and it's her birthday party this afternoon, so we've got all of that stuff happening. I think she's excited. The piece that I just want to add to the conversation, it's being considered, understanding what the protocol is and the reasons for implementing the protocol, whether it's full-time, hybrid, or remote, and understanding what it is that's how it's being communicated in your business, in a kind way, in an understanding way, and having a lot of people involved in the orientation of that. Not only HR and the CEO making a decision and boom, we've got to do it.
Yeah.
Oh, and let's include the finance director because he's got the numbers. He's the numbers guy.
Yeah.
That's not what defines the culture. It's the people in your business that define the culture. And if they come up from a change management perspective, creating some of us are going to be hybrid, some of us are going to be offsite and working remotely completely, how are we supporting them so that they come in periodically so that we still maintain their well-being? And then some of us are going to be on site permanently. And how can we potentially rotate that for ourselves so that the team is fully represented for 5 days a week? So then maybe on a Thursday, 3 of us can work from home. And maybe on a Friday, 2 of us can work from home. But what has happened sometimes is that people are working from a hybrid perspective. Your camera's gone off, Kirsty.
I know.
For some
Sorry,
reason.
I am trying to bring it back.
Okay. And so working from a hybrid perspective, Maggie agrees. Working from a hybrid perspective is where some people say, oh, I can't work from the office on Tuesday because Amazon's delivering. So it's okay if that happens while you're working from home, but let's not orientate ourselves towards working from home because there's other. I've got to lay my patio, I've got to dig the pool's being brought in, or I've got to open the door for the gardener. Those things are convenient when you're working from home, but those things shouldn't be the reason you're working from home.
And I think that's the difficulty. Sorry.
Yes, and it's the way you articulate it. Sorry.
Yeah, and I think that's the difficulty, right? Because it's almost like instead of setting boundaries and the policy for people to almost flex in the boundaries almost, people think, oh well, they're going to take the mick, they're not going to work, they working from home because they've got an Amazon delivery, and it almost becomes easier to blanket rule, go right, no one's working from home then, right? Because it almost saves that difficult conversation. Whereas what I suppose we say and what we support is that kind of real upfront setting of boundaries, policies, really clearly articulate what's expected. Because people are always going to, no matter whether it's all in or all out or an in between, there's always going to be someone that pushes those boundaries, and that, you know, it's always going to happen. But I feel like we've reverted back to the easiness of blanket, if you know, a blanket approach. So what are the real challenges then that we see? Because this isn't like, it's fine for us to sit here and saying this, and there genuinely is research and stats that back this kind of approach up the hybrid. It's not just that we think and believe it's the best thing. Like there's stuff, there's actual research behind it. But what are the challenges that we see then when we're out and about and we're talking to people? Where are the challenges that they don't adopt this, or they think it's easier to get everyone back in the office? Why do you think that is?
Okay. Before I answer that, there's a preamble for me. The other measurement for when someone is successful at work is, as a novice, they meet and exceed expectations in their job. As an intermediate, they meet and exceed expectations in their job. As a master, they meet and exceed expectations in their job. And so from a performance management and the discussion perspective, those are easy conversations to have with those individuals. It's when someone is underperforming and not delivering a piece of work that all the other inconveniences get brought into that discussion, like hybrid, like on-site, whatever those are. That's what it is. So the biggest challenge, I feel, is the capability of having a difficult discussion related to performance. And the second challenge, I feel, is the loss of information for quicker decision making. Yeah.
And I think there's a trust element in there as well around like that trust between the person that you can trust and rely on to deliver, the high performers, they always do what they say they're going to do, versus the person that you're going to have those constant challenges with and those difficult conversations. Those are the people that you're going to worry about. Those are the people where that lacks trust, that if I go and let you work from home, how do I know I'm going to get the output? I don't get the output in the office. How am I going to get that output at home? And then that comes the disparity of, well, if this person's doing that, we're just going to get everyone back in. That's what I see playing out.
Yes. And the accidental manager, the commercial director, the sales manager, those are people that then don't get provided the tools to be able to have the straightening discussion, to be able to rectify those things that you're talking about, so that there is a fairness, a autonomy, a certainty from a neuroscience perspective that I feel comfortable for leaving this person alone, whether they work on site or at home. And as soon as you get to that stage with 80% of your people, that's when you can have the discussion about hybrid.
And I think there's also you manage differently, don't you? You lead differently. There's almost a layer of skill that needs to come around, because it's you, like you mentioned earlier, me chatting over the desk to you, going, where you're at with this, Tienie? Are we on time with that? that doesn't happen. And unless as a manager you adapt and understand your people, how do they want to be communicated to? How often do they want to be checked in with? How often do you feel you want to check in? Are you giving them space to have that really informal conversation with you? Like, you need to think a little bit more, don't you, about how we interact, how we communicate with our teams. And I feel like what potentially happens is we don't check in because it's like it's got to be formal, it's got to be on a Zoom, we've got to set up a structured calendar meeting, and it almost becomes, we don't want to be too formal, so we don't do anything. And I feel like there's a potential loss of that interaction because people don't want to be too formal or don't want to micromanage, but they don't then reach out. Whereas actually it's helping people think a bit differently from a, how are we going to manage this team? Now we are remote, now we are hybrid. Like going into the office, if we're all in the office on different days, how is that benefiting the team and being able to connect? It's having those conversations, isn't it? If you are going to go remote or hybrid, it's understand the boundaries of how do you now manage, because that's a different style of management to sitting around the desk with somebody.
Definitely. And it's having those trust conversations. And I would say in a team of 10, you'll have about 10%, one or two people that are potentially high maintenance individuals that you feel aren't aligned to the culture or aren't performing to their best. And those are the people that you need to have that trusting conversation with on how you can help them excel and get to the right space in the team. And there's nothing wrong in having those discussions, because
Absolutely
what you're
not.
doing is you're setting and managing expectations related to the conditions that you're creating. And that's the whole premise of the way working landscape is changing.
And another big argument, which we'll bring to the table for discussion, is around onboarding. And like, this to me is a vital part of any kind of process of bringing somebody into your business. And if you are remote or hybrid, like, because an argument out there is people don't get involved in the culture, they don't get to know people, they don't get to learn as quickly. And I understand all of that, and I see where they're coming from with that perspective. I genuinely do. And this is where I think if you don't have an employee journey through your business mapped out, including onboarding and offboarding, I feel like you're going to fall short, because there is a potential for someone to feel a little bit disconnected, not involved, not included. And that's where an intentional plan comes into it for me.
And this is something that I came across so many years ago, and I keep, when I'm working with people in the OD space and in HR and in learning and development, from a consulting perspective, if you don't allocate 20% of your time to your line managers to line manage, it's not going to happen. And what you're talking about is line management. Is people management. It's having those one-to-one discussions. And so when we talk about accidental managers, is that this guy's a master in the sales field, and therefore let's make him the commercial director. So you take that skill set out of your team and then expect them to still meet the target.
And don't support him with additional skill sets.
Or her for having the discussions on how do I manage the situation where I was part of the team and now I'm leading the team, and making those transitions. And HR always kicks back and say that should just be a natural transcendence of who you are. But the point is, you need to make time and understand in the shifting and promoting of people that you're reducing their input because you want them to lead and delegate, and create succession plans and do all of those things without skipping a beat and not losing profit and all of those things. And so,
how often?
How
often do we see that? Like, how often do we see that? Like, all the time. And like we said, we leave on a Friday as a salesperson, and you come in on a Monday as the commercial director. And why aren't you now just having a miraculous, increase in skill set? and do your day job and manage this team of 8 people, please. And it's like, there's no support, and it's a completely different role. And we've said a million times, not everybody, that trajectory isn't for everybody. They could just stay being absolutely incredible in that sales role and help create some progression for them in that sales role, versus going, the only way to progress is up the ladder. Why can't we just be really great here? But I think the key thing that what we're saying is, whether you work in hybrid, remote, fully in-house, align that with your onboarding and your training and your upskilling. How are you going to be intentional about it? And it's not just, here's some digital resources, here's a laptop, off you go, now do the job, which we do see, right? Like, it's like, we remote, we don't have a team. And I see time again, people remote trying to integrate into a culture, into a team, and it's really difficult. Like, it genuinely is. And I see that side of the argument. So that's where businesses need to do better, by being intentional about how do we onboard, and that filters right the way through to, training skills, leadership skills, that team dynamics conversation for me.
Yeah. The onboarding and offboarding isn't for new people onboarding. You're onboarding a internal promotion. You're offboarding a team with the person that you've promoted. What is the vacuum that's been created, and how are we filling that? What are the discussions that we're having to create the conditions for ultimate performance? Because whether we like it or not, from a performing team, it goes back to norming when someone is promoted.
Yeah.
Or when someone enters it. And you might go through the norming phase quicker because you know each other already than initially, but it's still happening. And I feel that isn't accounted for. And I know we're talking about hybrid, remote, and on-site working at the minute, but all of these factors feed into what are the conditions you're creating for ultimate performance of your business.
And I think every aspect, again, I know we're specifically talking here about the future of how we're going to work, but how exactly what you said, this filters in to every touch point of your business. And you've got to consider that. And you've got to consider what works, what doesn't, what do your team, where do your team thrive? Like, what do they want? And it's almost, you've said it before, we see directors, CEOs making that decision based on their personal opinion or preference versus that of any kind of employee questionnaire, or understanding what the current environment is, or what the current reality is. What does your team want? And look at the research, look at what's been done. But I think there are external factors that get taken in. So we've got a huge office space in the centre of London that's empty. I do feel like that does drive the decision making.
As long as you take all the factors into consideration and have a collaborative approach with some of the people that you're employing, unless your intention is to cull the herd, so to speak, by forcing them all to come on site, because that is going to happen. And it's not an HR fix, it's an everybody fix. And people, if you see your culture offering something you don't like, it's most probably true. And where does it come from in representing itself in the way that it's representing itself? And so all of this stuff affects business culture.
100%. And I say this all the time, but the future of work is rapidly changing. We're becoming more digitalized. And I was looking at a research study that I think from Gen Z is the biggest percentage of generation that do not want a full-time office job. So that is changing, and they're coming through thick and fast and have a very strong opinion of what they want in the working world, which is very different to what we've had for the past 40, 50 years. So I do think there's going to be a force in generational change of how we work.
Of course.
That's going to play a part in all of this.
And just to lob Gen Alpha in, Because those conversations are going to start happening.
Yeah, they are. Anyway, we're coming to the top of the hour, half an hour. So as normal, it kind of just goes so quick. But just to summarize, what are we saying, Tienie? Have conversations, have some boundaries in, set some policies. And we definitely a fan of the hybrid.
Yes. Understand the conditions that you're creating.
Yes.
And the consequences of those conditions, and be comfortable with those before you implement.
Perfect. And on that note,